If a man can spend millions to protect his image, why couldn't he spend 1 second to protect the woman carrying his child? The Metropolitan Museum Charity Gala was supposed to be the crown jewel of New York's social calendar, a night where the city's wealthiest came together under the glitter of crystal chandeliers, the hum of polite laughter, and the intoxicating perfume of power. It was a place where fortunes could be made with a handshake, reputations secured with a toast, and scandals quietly buried under a mountain of champagne. But on this particular evening, one scandal would refuse to be buried. Damian Westwood, a man who had made his fortune predicting market trends and manipulating them to his advantage, stood at the center of it all. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a streak of silver at his temples that only made him more distinguished, he was the sort of man who commanded a room just by existing in it. Tonight, his custom Tom Ford tuxedo fit like a glove, his cufflinks glinting in the chandelier light, as though they too recognized the importance of the man wearing them. Beside him, in a deep sapphire gown that draped elegantly over her 5-month pregnant belly, stood Reagan Westwood. She wasn't just his wife, at least not in her mind. She was his partner, his anchor, the woman who had stood beside him through every late-night strategy session, every nerve-wracking board vote, every champagne celebration when another deal closed. And yet, in recent months, Reagan had begun to feel like nothing more than a prop in his life. A silent ornament he paraded around when it suited him. And then there was her, Roxanne Croft. 26, blood-red silk clinging to her surgically sculpted body, her lipstick a perfect match for the gown. She was everything Reagan wasn't, at least that's what Damian seemed to think. Young, intoxicating, dangerous in the way a flickering flame tempts a moth to its doom. She had started as a junior marketing associate at Westwood Holdings, but had risen through the ranks in a way that had nothing to do with her work performance. Reagan knew all about Roxanne. She'd known for 6 months. She'd overheard the hushed late-night phone calls, smelled the unfamiliar perfume on Damian's suits, and noticed the subtle but undeniable shift in the way he looked at her. She had been patient, too patient, telling herself that if she confronted him, she needed proof that no one could deny. And tonight, proof was walking toward her in a pair of 6-inch stilettos. It started innocently enough, or at least as innocently as 2 women meeting in a room full of photographers could be. Roxanne didn't smile as she approached, but she didn't sneer either. Instead, she gave Reagan a slow, assessing look, like a predator sizing up a potential rival. "Reagan," she said, her voice dripping with mock sweetness, "you look radiant." Reagan smiled tightly, the kind of smile that photographs well but doesn't reach the eyes. "Thank you. Pregnancy will do that to you." Before Roxanne could respond, Damian's voice cut through the air, low and irritated. "Reagan, could you step aside for a moment? You're blocking the photographers." It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it, as if she were a nuisance, an obstacle between him and the image he wanted to project. The crowd didn't hear the sharpness in his tone, but they saw what happened next. Reagan stepped back, and Damian, whether through frustration or carelessness, placed his hand on her shoulder and shoved her. It wasn't a violent shove, not enough to knock her over, but it was enough to make her stumble, enough for the cameras to catch her steadying herself against the back of a gold-plated chair, enough for the collective gasp of those nearest to them to ripple outward like a wave. Flashbulbs popped, gasps turned into whispers, and in that moment, Reagan understood something crystal clear. He wasn't worried about her feelings, her dignity, or even the fact that she was carrying his child. He was worried about Roxanne, about pleasing her. Reagan's heart pounded in her chest, her cheeks flushed with humiliation, but her mind was sharp as glass. She didn't yell, she didn't cry. Instead, she straightened her shoulders, smoothed the fabric of her gown, and fixed Damian with a look so cold it could have frozen the champagne in his glass. "Smile, Damian," she said softly enough that only he could hear. "The cameras are watching." And they were, more than either of them realized. What Damian didn't know was that Reagan had been planning for this. She had suspected he might do something humiliating tonight. The tiny camera sewn into the clasp of her clutch was already recording. Every sneer, every whispered insult, every casual display of disrespect. It was all there, captured in crystal-clear high definition. She wasn't sure, even as she stood there, whether she would use it. Maybe she would save it for the divorce proceedings she could feel coming. Maybe she would keep it as a reminder of the moment she decided she was done. But when she saw Roxanne's smug little smirk as Damien guided her toward the stage for the evening's keynote speech, the decision was made. There would be no quiet divorce, no silent exit, no amicable parting for the press to sugarcoat. Reagan Westwood was going to burn it all down. She slipped away from the main hall, her steps purposeful, her hand tightening around the clutch that now held more power than any stock portfolio. She could already picture it, every news outlet in the city scrambling to get the footage, every gossip blog running it on loop, every business rival salivating over the chance to watch Damien Westwood squirm. The thought made her pulse quicken, not with fear, but with something else, anticipation. In a few hours, Damien's perfect little world would come crashing down around him. He just didn't know it yet. And as Reagan stepped out into the cool night air, the city lights shimmering like 1,000 tiny witnesses, she couldn't help but smile. Because the only thing more dangerous than a woman scorned was a woman scorned with proof. What Damien didn't realize was that by morning, the entire world would see exactly who he was, thanks to the woman he thought was powerless. Before the gala, before the shove, before the carefully hidden camera in her clutch, Reagan Westwood had been someone else. She wasn't born into the polished high society world she now navigated so effortlessly. Reagan Davies grew up in a small coastal town in Maine, the kind of place where everyone knew your name and your business, whether you wanted them to or not. Her father, a high school history teacher, and her mother, a nurse at the local clinic, raised her with old-fashioned values. Work hard, be kind, keep your word. Money was always tight, but their home was rich in warmth and love. From an early age, Reagan stood out, not just for her delicate features or her warm hazel eyes, but for her sharp mind. She excelled in school, earning a scholarship to Columbia University in New York City. It was there, amid the noise and energy of Manhattan, that she first felt the intoxicating pull of ambition. She majored in art history, dreaming of one day becoming a curator for one of the city's great museums. She was in her second year of graduate school when she met Damien Westwood. It was at a charity auction hosted by a mutual acquaintance. Reagan had been there to volunteer, standing at the check-in table in a simple black dress and borrowed heels. Damien had been there to spend more on a single bottle of Bordeaux than she paid in rent for a year. He noticed her almost immediately, sauntering over between bidding wars with that lazy confidence of a man who knew the world would bend for him. "Which painting would you choose if you could have any of them?" he asked, his voice a low, rich baritone that seemed to hum through her. She laughed nervously, caught off guard. "I'm not sure I could pick just one." "That's the difference between you and me," he said with a smile that felt like a spotlight. "I always know exactly what I want." By the end of the night, she had his business card in her purse and a flurry of texts lighting up her phone. He was relentless. Lavish dinners, surprise tickets to Broadway shows, weekend trips to the Hamptons. At first, Reagan told herself it was just fun, that she wasn't ready for something serious. But Damien had a way of making her feel like she was the center of the universe, and eventually, she let herself believe it. Their romance was a whirlwind. Within a year, he proposed at the top of the Empire State Building, the city spread out below them like a promise. He slipped a diamond ring onto her finger that glittered almost as much as the tears in her eyes. A few months later, they were married in a ceremony that made the society pages, a seaside estate, strings of fairy lights, her mother crying softly in the front row. For a while, married life was good. Damien encouraged her to leave her job at the gallery, telling her she didn't need to work anymore. "Focus on us," he said. "On the family we're going to build." And Reagan, swept up in the fantasy, agreed. At first, she didn't mind. Their home was a penthouse with views of Central Park, every corner decorated with pieces they'd chosen together. She spent her days hosting charity luncheons, redecorating rooms on a whim, and attending Damien's business events. She told herself it was temporary, that one day she'd return to her career. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, her life became less about what she wanted and more about what Damien needed. If he had a late-night meeting, she waited up for him. If he had a bad day, she rearranged her schedule to make his favorite dinner. When he started spending more time at the office, she told herself it was just the demands of a growing company. Then came the first lie. A late business dinner that didn't line up with the expense receipt she found in his jacket pocket. The faint scent of perfume she didn't own clinging to his collar. When she asked him about it, he laughed and kissed her forehead. "You've been reading too many tabloids, sweetheart." She wanted to believe him. She did believe him. For a while. But the cracks were spreading. He began to grow impatient when she asked questions, dismissive when she voiced concerns. When she told him she was pregnant, his reaction was muted. He said all the right words. "That's wonderful news. We'll be such great parents." But there was a flicker in his eyes she couldn't quite place. As her belly grew, so did her isolation. He attended fewer doctor's appointments, citing work obligations. He spent more nights networking, more weekends at conferences. When she suggested they take a short trip before the baby arrived, he said he was too busy. And then she met Roxanne. It was purely by accident. Reagan had stopped by the Westwood Holdings offices to drop off a signed charity agreement, only to find Roxanne perched casually on the edge of Damien's desk, laughing at something on his phone. The way they looked at each other told Reagan everything she needed to know. The confrontation that followed was icy and calculated. Damien didn't deny knowing Roxanne, but insisted she was just a talented employee. When Reagan pressed, his voice hardened. "You're overreacting. You're hormonal. Maybe focus on the baby instead of inventing problems." It was then that Reagan realized something important. He wasn't going to protect her. Not from humiliation, not from betrayal. If anything, he expected her to protect him, his image, his reputation, his precious empire. So she began to protect herself instead. She quietly contacted an attorney. She met with a tech-savvy friend from her Columbia days, someone who specialized in discreet security devices. That's how she came to have a camera hidden in the clasp of her clutch at the gala. She wasn't looking for a fight, but if one came, she wanted the world to see it exactly as it happened. Still, a part of her had hoped it wouldn't come to that. That maybe, just maybe, Damien would see her standing beside him in that sapphire gown and remember why he had fallen in love with her in the first place. But love had nothing to do with the man he had become. As she sat in the back of the town car on the way to the gala that night, the baby kicking gently against her ribs, she thought about the girl from Maine who had dreamed of art museums and quiet mornings by the sea. She wondered how that girl had ended up here, hurt, angry, and carrying the child of a man who no longer saw her. What she didn't know was that by the end of the night, she wouldn't just be the woman Damien shoved in front of a room full of cameras. She would be the woman who turned that shove into the most devastating weapon he'd ever faced. Because this wasn't just going to be a scandal, it was going to be his ruin. The Metropolitan Museum Charity Gala was an event that thrived on spectacle. Everything about it was designed to dazzle. The sweeping marble staircase lined with orchids, the gold-trimmed champagne flutes, the way the light from the crystal chandeliers scattered across the room like shattered stars. It was the kind of night where old money mingled with new money, where politicians, actors, CEOs, and socialites brushed shoulders under the pretense of philanthropy. The truth was, the gala was as much about power as it was about charity. It was a battlefield disguised in velvet and diamonds. Reagan Westwood had attended many of these events before. Usually she was a willing participant, gliding through the room on Damien's arm, offering warm smiles to his investors, making small talk with their wives. But tonight felt different. Tonight, she was here for one reason, to see if her suspicions about Damien's public loyalty, or lack thereof, would be confirmed. The moment she stepped into the grand hall, she felt the familiar wave of attention ripple through the crowd. Her sapphire gown, chosen for its elegance rather than ostentation, hugged her gently growing belly. Her hair was swept into a soft chignon, a few loose strands framing her face. The diamond pendant at her throat caught the light with every step. Damien walked beside her, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back. To anyone watching, they looked like the perfect couple. But Reagan knew his touch was a calculated gesture, not an affectionate one. He was performing for the cameras. They hadn't even made it to their table before the first photographer stopped them. "Mr. and Mrs. Westwood, one for the Wall Street Journal?" the man asked, already raising his camera. Damien's smile was instant, his posture straightening as though he were preparing for a magazine cover. Reagan smiled too, but she knew the difference between their smiles. His was a brand, hers was a mask. As they moved deeper into the hall, Reagan began to notice the glances. Women leaning toward each other to whisper, men casting quick looks between her and something, or someone, else. She followed the invisible line of their eyes, and that's when she saw her. Roxanne Croft was seated at a table near the stage, her blood-red gown a deliberate contrast to Reagan's serene blue. The fabric clung to her like it had been painted on. Every curve accentuated, every movement a subtle performance. Her lipstick matched the dress perfectly. Her smile too wide, too knowing. Reagan's heart didn't race. It didn't sink. Instead, it settled into a slow, steady rhythm, the kind that came before a storm. She adjusted the clutch in her hand, making sure the tiny hidden camera's lens had a clear view of the room. Damien spotted Roxanne at almost the same moment. His hand dropped from Reagan's back, his steps unconsciously veering toward the other woman. He masked it quickly, redirecting their path to the VIP section, but Reagan caught the slip. It was all the confirmation she needed. He hadn't come here to be by her side. He had come here for Roxanne. At the VIP table, the air was thick with the scent of money, expensive cologne, designer fabrics, rare floral arrangements. Damien immediately began working the room, shaking hands with CEOs, laughing a little too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. Reagan took her seat, offering polite conversation to the guests on either side of her. But her attention was always drifting back toward Roxanne. And then it happened. Roxanne rose from her table, her every movement dripping with confidence, and crossed the room toward them. Conversations paused subtly, eyes tracking her progress like the slow, hypnotic movement of a predator. When she reached their table, Damien stood to greet her. He didn't introduce her to Reagan. He didn't have to. The tension between the three of them was its own introduction. "Roxanne," he said smoothly, his smile bordering on intimate. "Glad you could make it." "Wouldn't miss it," she replied, her gaze flicking briefly, dismissively to Reagan before returning to Damien. Reagan kept her face neutral, her hands resting lightly on her lap. She knew she was being watched, not just by Roxanne and Damien, but by everyone within earshot. This wasn't just a social interaction. This was theater, and she was expected to play her part. "Lovely to see you again," Reagan said evenly. "Of course," Roxanne replied, her tone just shy of patronizing. Before Reagan could respond, one of Damien's investors approached with a group of colleagues. "Damien, we were just talking about that Westwood Holdings expansion into Dubai." Damien's attention snapped back to the men, his eyes lighting up. He excused himself from the table, gesturing for Reagan to move so he could stand beside the investor. And that's when it happened. It was subtle, almost casual, but in front of a room full of people, it might as well have been broadcast on a giant screen. As Reagan began to shift her chair, Damien's hand pressed against her shoulder, not in a guiding gesture, but in a firm push to move her faster. The chair leg caught on the thick carpet, and she stumbled slightly, as like steadying herself against the back of another chair. There was a small gasp from someone nearby. A few people looked away quickly, pretending they hadn't seen. Others leaned closer, their eyes bright with the thrill of gossip. Damien didn't notice. Or maybe he didn't care. He was already deep in conversation with the investor, his back to Reagan. But her hidden camera noticed. The lens in her clutch had captured the moment perfectly. The push, the stumble, the way she caught herself without a word. It also caught Roxanne's expression, the faint upward twitch of her lips, the satisfaction in her eyes. Reagan sat back down, her heart pounding, not from embarrassment but from clarity. There was no saving this marriage. No pretending it was just a bad night or a misunderstanding. And as the orchestra began to play a soft waltz, couples moving to the dance floor, Reagan knew the evening was far from over. The most important moment hadn't happened yet. She just had to wait for the perfect time to act. Because once she walked out of this gala, Damien Westwood's carefully curated empire would start to crumble, and it would all begin with what was hidden inside her clutch. The moment Damien's hand pressed against Reagan's shoulder and sent her stumbling, the energy in the room shifted. It wasn't loud, it wasn't violent, but it was unmistakable. The closest guests pretended to focus on their champagne, their eyes darting toward her in quick, furtive glances. Others whispered behind manicured hands. The gala orchestra played on, but the lilting waltz now seemed to underscore the tension rather than mask it. Reagan's cheeks flushed, but not from shame. It was anger, controlled, contained, sharpened into something she could wield. She eased herself back into her chair, adjusting her gown as though nothing had happened. Her hand brushed the clutch in her lap, feeling the hidden camera still recording. Across the table, Roxanne sipped her champagne, the corner of her mouth curling in a way that said she saw it, she liked it. Damien didn't look at Reagan at all. He was leaning toward the investor, his voice loud enough to carry over the music, animated as he talked about profit margins and international markets. Reagan let her eyes sweep the room, committing every witness to memory. The wife of a hedge fund manager sitting 2 tables over, the society columnist with her notebook tucked discreetly under the table, the junior photographer snapping candids from the side of the room. They had all seen. And that was good. That was very good. A waiter appeared beside her, refilling her glass with practiced grace. "Are you all right, Mrs. Westwood?" he asked quietly, his brow creased in genuine concern. "I'm fine," she said softly, offering a small smile. "Thank you." But inside, she was making calculations. This wasn't the kind of humiliation that could be brushed off or spun into a misunderstanding. In the world they lived in, perception was reality, and Damien had just handed her a weapon. The evening dragged on. Damien returned to the table briefly, only to excuse himself again a few minutes later to circulate. Reagan knew exactly where he was going before she even looked. Sure enough, he ended up near Roxanne's table, bending slightly toward her as she leaned in with a hand resting lightly on his forearm. Reagan's phone buzzed in her clutch. She discreetly glanced at the screen. It was a text from her attorney. "Did you get what we talked about?" Her thumb hovered over the keyboard. "Yes," she typed, and more. She slid the phone away just as one of the gala's hosts tapped the microphone to announce the evening's auction winners. Damien returned to escort her to the stage for a photo with the other donors. His hand settled at her back again, the pressure just enough to remind her that in his mind she was a prop. The photographer counted down, 3, 2, 1, and the flash went off. Damien smiled wide, teeth perfect, eyes bright. Reagan smiled too, but hers was different. Hers was a smile that said, "You have no idea what's coming." When they returned to their table, she excused herself to the restroom. Instead of heading there, she took a sharp turn toward the quiet corridor that led to the gala's media office. It was a small room tucked away from the main event, used by the press team to manage event coverage and release official photos to the media in real time. She knew the woman in charge, Harper Lane, a junior publicist who'd once interned for a friend of Reagan's. Harper's eyes widened when she saw her. "Mrs. Westwood, is everything okay?" Reagan set her clutch on the desk and opened it just enough to slide out a small memory card. "I need this sent to 3 outlets immediately," she said quietly. "The New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and Page 6. Tell them they'll want to see it before midnight. No questions, Harper. Just do it." Harper hesitated, glancing at the clutch. "Is it?" "Yes," Reagan said simply. "And make sure the footage stays unedited." Harper swallowed hard, then nodded. "Consider it done." Reagan returned to the gala floor as though nothing had happened. Damien was laughing at something Roxanne had said, his hand resting just a little too casually on the back of her chair. Reagan crossed the room, reclaiming her seat without so much as a glance at them. The rest of the night unfolded in a blur of speeches, applause, and the muted chime of champagne glasses. But beneath the surface, Reagan could feel the current shifting. By the time dessert was served, she saw the first sign, an unfamiliar man at the far end of the room glancing down at his phone, then up at her, then back to his phone again. It had begun. Damien didn't notice. He was too busy enjoying the attention of the younger woman by his side. When the gala finally wound down, he offered Reagan a perfunctory hand to help her from her chair. "Let's go," he said, his tone more command than request. They stepped out into the crisp night air, the city skyline glittering against the dark. A black town car waited at the curb. Damien slid in first, tapping at his phone before the door even closed. Reagan settled beside him, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Halfway back to their penthouse, Damien's phone began to buzz incessantly. He glanced at the screen, his brow furrowing. Then another buzz. And another. "What the hell?" he muttered, opening the first message. His jaw tightened. Reagan looked out the window, hiding her smile. She knew what he was seeing. The clip of him shoving his pregnant wife at the gala, captured in perfect clarity, now bouncing from one news outlet to another, already trending on social media with hashtags that would burn his image into the public's memory for all the wrong reasons. By the time they reached their building, his phone was still buzzing, his face a mask of cold fury. "Did you?" he began, but she cut him off. "I told you to smile tonight, Damien," she said softly, stepping out of the car. "Now the whole world gets to see it." And she knew this was just the beginning, the first domino in the chain that would bring his empire crashing down. The elevator ride up to the Westwood penthouse was silent, except for the soft hum of machinery. Damien stood beside Reagan, his jaw clenched, his phone in his hand, thumbs flying over the screen. The building's mirrored walls reflected their image back at them. Him, rigid and seething, her, serene on the outside but fraying on the inside. When the elevator doors slid open, Damien stepped out first, muttering something about damage control. Reagan followed at a measured pace, every step echoing against the marble floors of the sprawling apartment. The space was immaculate, a testament to her obsessive eye for detail, but tonight it felt like a stage set. Beautiful, hollow, lifeless. The moment Damien disappeared into his office and shut the door, Reagan's composure cracked. She walked past the glittering city view and into the master bedroom, closing the door behind her. Her hands shook as she unclasped the diamond pendant at her throat, letting it fall onto the dresser with a soft clink. She slipped out of the sapphire gown, carefully hanging it in the closet, then collapsed onto the edge of the bed in her silk slip. That's when the tears came. They weren't loud or dramatic. They were quiet, relentless, the kind that come from a place deeper than sadness. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes, willing herself to stop, but the images wouldn't leave her. Damien's dismissive shove, Roxanne's smirk, the cold glances from people who had once called her a friend. The baby kicked gently, as if sensing her distress. Reagan's hand went instinctively to her stomach. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I promise I'll take care of us. I won't let him take anything more from me." But promises were easier to make than to keep. For the next hour she sat there in the dimly lit bedroom, staring at nothing, listening to the faint sound of Damien pacing in his office and barking into his phone. She could imagine the calls. His publicist, his lawyer, maybe even Roxanne. He would be spinning the story already, trying to twist it into something harmless. A misunderstanding, maybe. She knew him well enough to know he'd try to turn it back on her. He'd say she was overreacting, that she'd embarrassed him by making a scene, that the video had been doctored. The thought made her stomach churn. Finally, she rose and crossed to the vanity, catching sight of her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes were swollen, her makeup smudged. She barely recognized the woman staring back at her. "This isn't who you are," she told her reflection quietly. But the truth was, she didn't entirely believe it. Not yet. The weight of the years they'd spent together pressed down on her. The dinners, the galas, the endless compromises. She had given up her career, her independence, her identity, all in the name of building a life together. And what had it gotten her? Public humiliation and a marriage that was nothing but a transaction to him now. For a fleeting moment, she wondered if she should have kept her head down, swallowed her pride, and endured it for the sake of the child. After all, walking away from Damien Westwood meant walking away from the lifestyle, the security, the connections. It meant starting over while 6 months pregnant. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She picked it up to find a text from her mother in Maine. "Saw something on the news. Are you okay?" Reagan hesitated, then typed back, "I'm fine." "Don't worry." She hit send, then tossed the phone aside. The last thing she needed was her mother worrying, or worse, offering to come stay with her. This was something she needed to handle on her own. She went into the bathroom, splashing cold water on her face, forcing her mind to slow down. Her gaze fell on the framed photo by the sink. Her and Damien at last year's gala, arms around each other, smiling like they actually meant it. She turned it face down. For a few minutes she let herself crumble. She sat on the cool tile floor, knees drawn up, breathing in deep, uneven gulps. She thought about the girl she'd been when she met him, full of hope, believing she'd found someone who would cherish her forever. Then she thought about the woman she was now, tired, betrayed, and holding the most damning piece of evidence she could ever have against him. That's when something shifted. The tears stopped, her breathing evened out. She stood, straightened her slip, and walked back into the bedroom. She picked up her phone again, not to call her mother, but to open the encrypted folder where the full gala footage was stored. She watched it once, start to finish. The shove, the stumble, the look on Roxanne's face. Damien's complete lack of concern. It was all there, undeniable. Her breakdown was over. The woman who had cried on the bed an hour ago was gone. In her place was someone colder, sharper, more dangerous. She opened her messages and typed to her attorney, "Send the preliminary divorce papers. We're not negotiating quietly." Then she sent another message to Harper, the publicist. "Keep feeding the footage to every outlet that wants it. Let them run it on a loop." She could almost feel her old self returning. The woman who'd fought her way out of a small town to earn a spot at Columbia. The woman who'd once been strong enough to stand on her own. She had lost that part of herself somewhere along the way, but now it was clawing its way back. In the distance, she could hear Damien's voice still raised on a call. She smiled faintly. Let him scramble. Let him panic. Because the truth was, tonight had only been the opening move. What came next would make the shove look like a footnote in a much larger story, one where Reagan Westwood held every card, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel broken. She felt powerful. Damien Westwood thought he knew everything about his wife. He knew her favorite wine, the perfume she wore, the way she smiled for photographs without showing all her teeth. He knew she had a degree in art history, that she'd grown up in Maine, that she had no family in New York except for him. He knew she wasn't wealthy in her own right, not by his standards anyway, and that her life before him had been modest. Or at least, that's what he believed. What Damien didn't know was that Reagan Westwood, née Davies, was far more than the elegant ornament he thought he'd married. When she sat in the quiet of the master bedroom that night, divorce papers on the way, Reagan began making calls. The first was to her attorney, Michael Ames, a man Damien had met only once and dismissed as a small-time legal guy. Michael wasn't small-time. He was an expert in corporate law, with a reputation for dismantling corrupt empires brick by brick. He also owed Reagan a favor. "Send me the paperwork," Reagan told him. "And Michael, this isn't just a divorce. I want every financial record, every off-the-books account, every shell company. If it's there, I want it in my hands." "You're going for the jugular," Michael said, not without admiration. "I'm going for the truth," she replied. Her next call was to someone Damien definitely didn't know about, her godmother, Evelyn Grant. Evelyn was a fixture in the art world, a philanthropist whose personal network included senators, museum directors, and billionaires who didn't need their names in the papers to be powerful. She had been the one to quietly fund Reagan's graduate studies when her scholarship fell short, and she had stayed in Reagan's life as a confidant, though they rarely appeared together in public. "Sweetheart," Evelyn's warm voice crackled over the line. "I saw the footage. He looked like a fool." "That's just the beginning," Reagan said. "I'm done playing the part he cast for me. I need to move fast and I need your help." Evelyn didn't hesitate. "You'll have it. My PR team can make sure the story stays in the headlines for as long as you need. And Reagan, you're not the only one who'd be happy to see him fall." By midnight, Evelyn's people were already reaching out to reporters who'd been on the sidelines for years, collecting quiet grudges against Damien Westwood. Reagan's third call was perhaps the most personal. It was to Marcus Hale, her old boss at the Manhattan Fine Arts Council. Marcus was one of the few people who knew just how much Reagan had sacrificed to marry Damien. He also knew she had a knack for strategy, not just in curating galleries, but in reading people. I can't go back to the gallery, Reagan told him, but I need a workspace. Somewhere quiet. Private. I'll have a key sent to you by morning, Marcus said. And Reagan, I'll be honest, I always wondered when you'd realize you were smarter than him. She almost laughed. Guess I finally caught up. When she ended the call, she allowed herself a moment to stand by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city lights. She felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: control. Damien thought she'd go to pieces after the gala, thought she'd hide at home and let him manage the fallout. He didn't know she had an entire network waiting for her signal. By 2 a.m., the footage was everywhere. Cable news debated whether the shove was intentional. Gossip blogs dissected Roxanne's reaction frame by frame. Social media was merciless. Hashtags calling for boycotts of Westwood Holdings trended worldwide. Damien emerged from his office, still in his tuxedo but with his tie loosened and his hair slightly disheveled. His eyes were cold. "You think this is funny," he said. Reagan didn't look away from the window. "I think it's the truth. If you can't handle it, maybe you shouldn't have done it. This will ruin us," he snapped. "No," she said evenly. "It'll ruin you." His mouth tightened. "Careful, Reagan. You're not built for war." She turned then, meeting his gaze with a calm he hadn't seen before. "You've been at war with me for years, Damien. You just didn't notice because I wasn't fighting back. Now I am." He stared at her for a long moment, then shook his head and walked away. When the penthouse door clicked shut behind him, she exhaled slowly. She wasn't naive. She knew he'd retaliate. Damien Westwood didn't like losing, and he had the resources to make her life hell. But he was underestimating her, and that was his first mistake. She sat down at the desk in the corner of the room, opened her laptop, and began drafting a timeline. Step 1 was already complete. Expose the shove. Step 2 would take more precision. She needed to connect Damien's public cruelty to his private corruption. That's where Michael's investigation would come in. She added Evelyn's PR team to the plan, assigning them to feed stories at calculated intervals so the scandal never lost momentum. Marcus's workspace would serve as her war room. And then, at the bottom of the page, she wrote the final step in neat, deliberate letters. Take everything. Leave him with nothing. She closed the laptop and leaned back, one hand resting on her stomach. The baby kicked again, as if in agreement. "Don't worry," she murmured. "Your father's not going to win this one." By the time dawn broke, Reagan had an army, lawyers, media contacts, and quiet allies in high places. Damien still thought he was playing chess with someone who only knew checkers. What he didn't realize was that Reagan had just put him in checkmate before he'd even made his first move. And the real strike was still to come. The morning after the gala, the city woke up talking about only one thing: Damien Westwood shoving his pregnant wife in front of New York's elite. News anchors replayed the footage on a loop, analysts debated whether it was intentional, and social media exploded with outrage. The hashtags #ChazJustice for Reagan and ShoveGate trended globally. Damien's PR team scrambled to release a statement, something about a misinterpreted moment and an unfortunate accident, but it only made things worse. The public had seen the look on his face, the stumble, the way he didn't even reach for her. They weren't buying it. Reagan stayed in the penthouse that day, not because she was hiding, but because she was planning her reemergence. She knew she couldn't step outside looking like the humiliated wife. No. When the world saw her again, she had to look untouchable. She called Evelyn. "I need the best," Reagan said simply. Evelyn didn't ask questions. By mid-morning, a small army arrived at the penthouse: hairstylists, makeup artists, wardrobe consultants. They came armed with garment racks of couture dresses, trays of jewelry, and an air of determination. The lead stylist, a tall woman named Celeste, studied Reagan for a long moment. "We're not hiding the pregnancy," she said finally. "We're making it your power. You're going to look like a queen, no an empress." For hours they worked. Her long hair was cut into a sleek, shoulder-length style with sharp edges that framed her face like armor. Her makeup was flawless but bold: dark liner, a deep rose lip, a touch of shimmer that caught the light without looking soft. The wardrobe team brought out a fitted white midi dress that hugged her figure, the color crisp and commanding, paired with a structured cream coat that flared just enough to suggest movement with every step. On her feet, nude heels, practical for her condition, but still elegant. When they were done, Celeste stepped back and smiled. "There she is," she said, "the woman he should have been afraid of." Reagan studied herself in the mirror. She didn't just look different, she felt different. The sadness from the night before was gone. In its place was something sharper, colder, more deliberate. That afternoon, Evelyn's driver pulled up in front of the building in a black Rolls-Royce. Reagan stepped out of the lobby into a wall of flashing cameras. "Reagan, how are you feeling? Do you have a message for your husband? Is the baby okay?" She didn't answer any of them directly. Instead, she smiled, a slow, confident smile that said she was in control. "I'm doing just fine," she said, "and I think the truth speaks for itself." Then she slid into the car and was gone, leaving them shouting after her. Her destination wasn't random. Evelyn had arranged for her to appear at a high-profile charity luncheon supporting single mothers in the arts, an event with just enough irony to sting. When she entered the ballroom, every head turned. Conversations paused. Cameras clicked. The event's host, a respected Broadway producer, greeted her warmly and escorted her to the head table. Reagan gave short, gracious answers to every question about her health, but when the subject of Damien came up, she was careful. "I believe in accountability," she said simply, "and I believe the world deserves to know the truth about the people they put on pedestals." The quote hit headlines before dessert was served. By evening, lifestyle blogs were publishing side-by-side comparisons. Reagan at the gala, stumbling under Damien's shove, and Reagan now, composed, radiant, and clearly not backing down. The transformation was the story, and the public ate it up. Meanwhile, Damien was having the worst day of his career. Westwood Holdings stock dipped 4% in a single trading session. Several board members demanded an emergency meeting. Clients began canceling appearances with him, citing scheduling conflicts. He called her twice that night. She didn't answer. Instead, Reagan sat in her new workspace, Marcus's private gallery office, surrounded by Evelyn's PR team and Michael's legal associates. The walls were covered in whiteboards, charting Damien's business holdings, political donations, and possible skeletons in his closet. Every time a new lead came in, Reagan's pen moved with precision, connecting the dots. She wasn't just preparing for a divorce, she was dismantling his public image piece by piece. "Tomorrow," Evelyn's PR lead said, "we release the second wave. We've got testimonies from 2 former assistants who say he created a toxic environment. No one's gone on record yet, but they're ready now." "Do it," Reagan said. "And after that?" Michael asked. She looked up from her notes, her eyes cold. "After that, we go for the money. If we can tie any of his shady deals to Westwood Holdings investors, the board will turn on him faster than he can blink." Celeste, still hanging around to tweak Reagan's look for upcoming appearances, smiled faintly. "I think you might enjoy this more than you expected." Reagan didn't deny it. That night, as she walked back into the penthouse, she found Damien waiting in the living room. He was still in his suit from the day before, looking like he hadn't slept. "You've made your point," he said flatly. "Now stop. You're embarrassing both of us." She set her purse down and met his gaze without flinching. "I'm not done." His jaw tightened. "You think you can survive without me? You think you can raise that child on your own?" Her smile was slow and deliberate. "I think you should start worrying about surviving without me." He didn't reply, but the muscle in his jaw twitched. She walked past him to the bedroom, not looking back. The next morning, a photo of Reagan at the charity luncheon, poised, glowing, unstoppable, was on the front page of 3 major newspapers. Damien's shove wasn't the headline anymore. She was. And the woman he thought he could break was now the one the world was rooting for. By the end of the week, Reagan's name had eclipsed Damien's in the headlines. The footage from the gala was still circulating, but now it was woven into a larger narrative, one of a wronged woman reclaiming her dignity and refusing to be silenced. That was exactly the narrative Reagan wanted. She knew the public was on her side, but sympathy alone wasn't enough. Damien could survive bad press. He had the resources and arrogance to ride out a scandal if it stayed in the realm of gossip. What he couldn't survive was a direct hit to the one thing he valued above all else, his business. On Monday morning, Reagan walked into the Manhattan offices of Westwood Holdings. She didn't sneak in through the back or send her lawyer ahead. She entered through the front, where the security guard's eyes widened in recognition. "Mrs. Westwood," he began, but she smiled politely. "Not for much longer," she said. The lobby, a cathedral of glass and steel, was already buzzing with employees heading to their desks. Conversations stilled as she stepped into the elevator, her cream coat draped over her shoulders, her heels clicking against the marble floor. She rode to the top floor, where Damien's office occupied the entire corner suite. His assistant, a nervous young man in a too-tight tie, half rose from his desk when she appeared. "Mrs. West? Reagan? He's in a meeting." "I know," she said calmly, pushing open the double doors without knocking. Inside, Damien sat at the head of a polished conference table, flanked by 3 board members and a financial analyst. A sleek PowerPoint presentation glowed on the screen behind him. The room froze when Reagan entered. Damien's eyes narrowed. "We're in the middle of something," he said, his tone a warning. "So am I," she replied, setting a manila folder on the table. "This is the list of shell corporations you've been using to funnel money from investor accounts into personal ventures, along with the offshore accounts you've conveniently forgotten to disclose to the board." One of the board members, a gray-haired man with a reputation for integrity, reached for the folder. Damien's hand shot out to block him. "Don't touch that," Damien snapped. Reagan tilted her head. "Why not? If there's nothing to hide, I'm sure they'll find it." Enlightening. The boardroom went silent. Damien's jaw tightened, his knuckles whitening on the table's edge. "This is not the place," he began, but she cut him off. "This is exactly the place. These men and women trusted you with their money, Damien. They trusted you with their reputations. And you've been using both to line your own pockets while playing king of New York society." One of the other board members, a woman in a charcoal suit, leaned forward. "Is this true?" she asked Damien. He didn't answer. Reagan took that as her cue to leave. "You can keep the folder," she said over her shoulder. "Consider it my parting gift." By the time she reached the lobby again, her phone was buzzing. It was Evelyn. "That little performance is already leaking," Evelyn said, her voice practically humming with satisfaction. "One of the board members called a journalist before you'd even left the building." "Good," Reagan said. "Make sure they know I didn't take a dime. This is about him, not me." 2 hours later, the news broke. Insider allegations rock Westwood Holdings blared across financial news sites. The story didn't come directly from Reagan. It didn't have to. All she'd done was put the right information in the right hands, in front of the right witnesses. The rest took care of itself. By late afternoon, Westwood Holdings stock had dropped another 6%. The board announced an internal review, which everyone knew was corporate speak for someone whose was about to get thrown overboard. Damien called her 5 times that day. She didn't pick up. Instead, she sat in Marcus's gallery office, sipping tea, while Evelyn's PR team drafted a statement for her. It was short, deliberate, and devastating. "I believe in accountability, in marriage, in business, and in public life. My focus is on protecting my child and my future. I will not be intimidated into silence." The statement went live just before the evening news cycle, ensuring maximum coverage. Television anchors dissected her words, pointing out that she hadn't denied anything about Damien's alleged misconduct. The implication was clear. If she had more, she was willing to use it. And she did have more. That evening, Michael called with an update. "We've traced one of the offshore accounts to a holding company in the Cayman Islands. It's in Roxanne Croft's name." Reagan's lips curled into a slow smile. "Of course it is." She knew the headline that would make "Millionaire's mistress linked to offshore accounts in corporate scandal." It would drag Roxanne into the mess and tie her directly to Damien's financial misconduct. "Hold it for now," Reagan told Michael. "Let them sweat over today's news first, then we drop the next bomb." As the sun set over the city, Reagan stood at the window of her workspace, looking out over the skyline. Each tower of glass and steel seemed to glint in approval. She had just walked into Damien's empire and planted a charge at its foundation. She wasn't just fighting back anymore. She was winning. But she knew this was only the first strike. The next one would be personal, and it would hurt more than any loss on a balance sheet. 2 weeks after the gala, the city was still buzzing. Damien's name had become toxic in business circles, whispered only in backroom conversations and behind closed doors. Westwood Holdings was under investigation. Board members were openly talking about his removal for the good of the company. And yet, Damien still clung to the hope that he could control the narrative. That hope died the night Reagan walked into the Westwood Holdings annual investor gala. Alone. It wasn't the same charity gala where everything had started. This was a far more serious affair, attended by investors, analysts, and media outlets hungry for updates on the company's future. Damien had planned to stand on stage, deliver a reassuring speech, and convince the world he was still in charge. Reagan had other plans. She arrived in a floor-length black gown with a high neckline and long sleeves, a look that was powerful without being flashy. Her hair was sleek, her makeup sharp. The diamond pendant she'd worn the night of the shove was replaced by a simple gold chain with a small charm, something that felt like her, not an accessory picked by Damien. The moment she stepped into the lobby, the air changed. Cameras turned, conversations hushed. She walked with slow, deliberate steps, her hand resting lightly on her belly. She wasn't just attending, she was owning the room. Inside the ballroom, Damien was already at the podium, flipping through his notes as the crowd settled. He looked up and for a moment he froze. Then he forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "tonight is about looking forward and telling the truth." Reagan's voice rang out from the back of the room. Every head turned. She walked forward, unhurried, her heels clicking against the marble floor. A low murmur rippled through the audience as she approached the stage. Damien's smile faltered. "This isn't your event," he said, his voice tight. "This isn't your company anymore," she replied. She mounted the steps to the stage, coming to stand a few feet from him. She didn't touch the microphone. She didn't need to. Her voice carried. "For weeks, you've told the media this is a misunderstanding," she said to the audience. "That the shove, the humiliation, the lies, they were accidents. But what you haven't told them is about the money, the offshore accounts, the shell corporations, and the fact that your so-called business partner, Roxanne Croft, has her name on one of them." A gasp went through the crowd. Damien's face darkened. "You don't know what you're talking about." Reagan turned to the large projection screen behind them. "Play it." The screen flickered to life, not with the Gala shove video, but with documents, transaction logs, and wire transfers linking Damien and Roxanne to millions siphoned from investor funds. Each slide was time-stamped, signed, undeniable. The audience erupted. Some investors shouted questions, others turned to each other in disbelief. The camera crews in the back captured every second. "You forged signatures, you moved money offshore, and you did it all while pretending to be the respectable face of this company," Reagan continued. "But tonight, everyone here sees the truth, and tomorrow, so will the rest of the world." Damien stepped toward her, his voice low. "You think this makes you a hero? You think they'll side with you once I tell them how much you've taken from me?" She smiled faintly. "I haven't taken anything that wasn't mine. But you've taken more than you can ever give back." Security moved in, not for her, but for him. Two men in dark suits flanked Damien, speaking quietly. The board chair, standing near the front, addressed the crowd. "Effective immediately," he announced. "Damien Westwood is suspended as CEO pending a full investigation." The applause was instant and deafening. Damien's face went pale. Reagan stepped aside as the security guards escorted him from the stage. He didn't look back at her. She turned to the audience. "Thank you for your time. I believe the investors deserve transparency. I believe the employees deserve stability. And I believe my child deserves to grow up knowing that the truth always wins." Flashes went off. Her words were already being tweeted, posted, and live-streamed. She gave a small nod, then left the stage. Outside, reporters crowded around her. "Reagan, how did you get the evidence?" "What happens next?" She gave them the same calm smile she'd worn walking in. "What happens next is justice." The next morning, Damien's arrest for financial fraud was the lead story on every network. Photos of him being led out of his penthouse in handcuffs were paired with clips of Reagan standing on stage, fearless and unflinching. For years, Damien had believed she was just an accessory to his life, a beautiful prop for his public image. That night proved she was the one holding the strings all along, and the world had just watched her cut them, one by one. 3 months later, the world had moved on from Damien Westwood, but Reagan hadn't forgotten. She didn't dwell on him every day. She didn't have to. His name was still in the headlines, but now it was attached to court hearings, indictments, and financial settlements. The trial was still months away, but the outcome was inevitable. The evidence Reagan had helped uncover was airtight. Westwood Holdings had cut all ties, the board had voted unanimously to remove him, and several of his former allies had testified against him to save themselves. Reagan didn't attend the hearings. She didn't need to watch him squirm in a courtroom to feel the victory. Her win had come the moment she walked off that stage at the investor gala. Everything after that was just the echo. She had other things to focus on, like the baby growing inside her and the life she was determined to build without Damien's shadow. Her divorce had been finalized quickly, thanks to the leverage she held. She didn't fight for his penthouse or his cars. Instead, she negotiated for something far more valuable: liquid assets, enough to ensure her independence for life. Damien, desperate to avoid more damaging leaks, had signed without a fight. Reagan moved out of the penthouse and into a restored brownstone in the West Village, a place that felt alive, with creaking hardwood floors, sunlit rooms, and a little garden out back where she could sip tea in the mornings. The first night she slept there, she left the windows open to let the city sounds in. For the first time in years, she slept without the feeling of someone watching her. Her days found a new rhythm. She met with architects to design a nursery, attended prenatal yoga classes, and took long walks through the neighborhood. People recognized her sometimes at the cafe, but their smiles weren't pitying anymore. They were admiring. "You're stronger than most people I know," one woman told her in the grocery store, her voice low as if sharing a secret. Reagan had simply smiled. She didn't feel like a hero. She just felt free. Evelyn remained a constant presence, visiting often and fussing over Reagan like a second mother. Marcus insisted she keep using the gallery office as her workspace, and together they began developing a new initiative, an arts foundation dedicated to supporting women in creative fields who had faced abuse or financial control. Reagan poured her heart into the project, using both her experience and her newfound platform to secure funding. It wasn't just work, it was healing. The baby's due date drew closer, and with it came a sense of quiet anticipation. One crisp spring morning, Reagan woke before dawn, unable to sleep. She wrapped herself in a sweater and stepped out into the garden, breathing in the cool air. The city was still, the streets damp from an overnight rain. She rested her hands on her stomach. "We made it," she whispered. "We're gonna be okay." The baby kicked, and she smiled. Later that week, the call came. Damien had accepted a plea deal. He would serve prison time and pay massive restitution. The news outlets framed it as the fall of a titan, but for Reagan, it was just the final chapter closing. She didn't gloat. She didn't even tell anyone right away. She simply went about her day, tending to the life she had fought to protect. 2 weeks later, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Samuel James Westwood Davies, a name that carried her strength and her history. Evelyn was at her side in the hospital, holding her hand through the delivery. When the nurse placed Samuel in her arms, Reagan felt an overwhelming rush of love and relief. "This is your fresh start," Evelyn whispered. It was more than that. It was their victory. Reagan's story became one that people told in quiet moments over coffee or wine, about the woman who had been pushed in public and pushed back harder. She didn't seek the spotlight, but she didn't hide from it either. When a prominent magazine asked her to do a feature on resilience and reinvention, she agreed. Not to talk about Damien, but to talk about survival, about starting over, about the importance of knowing your own worth. In the interview, the journalist asked her if she forgave him. Reagan thought for a long moment before answering. "I don't forgive what he did," she said, "but I've stopped letting it define me. Forgiveness isn't for him, it's for me, and I've already given myself that." When the piece was published, the photo of her holding Samuel in the garden made the cover. The caption read, "The woman who walked away and won." Months passed. Summer arrived. Samuel grew stronger, his eyes bright and curious. Reagan found joy in the smallest moments, watching him sleep, feeling his tiny fingers curl around hers, reading to him in the quiet afternoons. One day, while pushing Samuel's stroller through the park, she passed a newsstand. Damien's face was on the cover of a tabloid, the headline blaring about his upcoming sentencing. Reagan glanced at it briefly, then kept walking. He was part of her story, but no longer the center of it. As she reached the park's fountain, she paused, looking up at the sky. She thought about everything it had taken to get here. The humiliation, the fear, the nights she'd cried alone. She thought about the moment in the bathroom at the penthouse when she'd promised herself she'd fight. And she realized she had kept that promise. Her life now was not about revenge. It was about peace. It was about Samuel. It was about herself, the woman she had fought to reclaim. Reagan took a seat on a bench, Samuel sleeping in his stroller beside her. She pulled out a notebook and began jotting down ideas for the Foundation's next project. The world still had too many women who thought they had no way out. She intended to show them there was always a way. As the sun dipped lower, casting the park in a warm golden glow, she closed the notebook and watched the people passing by, some smiling, some lost in thought, all moving forward. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. And she knew with absolute certainty that no one, not Damien, not anyone, would ever take that from her again. Because she had learned the truth. Sometimes the shove that knocks you down is the very thing that pushes you into the life you were meant to have. So the story has ended, my wonderful friends. Are you still here with me until now? If you are, it means something in this journey has touched your heart in its own way. Maybe it's a reminder that no matter how hard life pushes us down, we can still rise, stronger than before. As an old heterodox saying goes, the wound is the place where the light enters you. Sometimes, the pain we think will break us is the very thing that shapes us into who we're meant to be. So if you're facing your own storms, remember, you are not powerless, and you are not alone. Let this story be a little spark for your courage. If you feel it, please like this video, share it so others can feel it too, and subscribe to the channel. And hey, drop your thoughts in the comments, because I want to hear your story too.